Let me invite you to open up to Mark chapter 7. I'll warn you that in advance that we will be turning to Matthew because Matthew covers some things that Mark doesn't, and it really helps fill in the story, fill in the blanks, because Mark is a little bit vague about some things that Matthew is a little bit more. We're going to be reading Mark chapter 7, verse 24 through 30 about the Syrophoenician woman. Syro meaning Syrian. The Phoenicians, as a matter of fact, it's just strange. I read a book this year about the ancient Phoenicians, and it was actually quite fascinating, the seafaring people. But Syrophoenician, these are the people who were in that day in what is today Syria. And they were a seafaring people in the cities of Tyre and Sidon, which are ancient cities that have a lot of wonderful history behind them. This miracle is about this Syrophoenician woman's daughter who's demon-possessed, who the Lord cast the demons out of. There's 35 recorded miracles in the Gospels, and of them, 4 directly involve women. This is one of them. The others are Jesus healing Peter's mother-in-law in Mark chapter 1, Jesus raising the widow of Nain's daughter in Luke chapter 7. It's a fascinating story. I remember preaching on it when we went through Luke. The raising of Lazarus, you say, well, Lazarus wasn't a female, but the story has a lot to do with his 2 sisters in John 11. And then here we are in this passage, the casting out of the demon recorded here in Mark chapter 7. Jesus came to the area of Tyre and Sidon, probably from Gennesaret and the Capernaum area. And Tyre and Sidon were cities about 40 miles north of Capernaum and on the Mediterranean coast. Again, we don't have time for it, but the history of these cities in ancient warfare are fascinating. How their enemies just kept throwing rocks and dirt and rubbish and anything else in the water, and pretty soon built a causeway out to a city that they thought was impregnable because it was a little island off the coast. It's got a lot of history in it. But why did Jesus leave Israel? Because he's now outside of Israel. It's the only time he ever left Israel. He went because he was looking for some downtime. He's been looking for some downtime in the last several stories, and that's still a lot of what it is. But I don't think it's merely that. I think that that's the obvious because we're told that. But I think that he was there to cast a demon out of a girl, because I don't believe in any coincidences. He went out of Israel to rest. He went out of Israel to cast a demon out of this young girl. Why did he do it? Because a concerned mother discovered that he was there, and she came to him for help. And as we'll see, there was many obstacles in her way, and she overcame them all by faith and ended up getting what she was asking for. It's a great lesson. There was 4 strikes against this woman. First of all, she was Jewish, not Gentile. Jewish males, which Jesus was, didn't talk to women who were not their relatives, especially strangers and what have you. We see the same thing happening with Jesus talking to the woman from Samaria at the well. She even said, "Why are you, a Jew, speaking to me, a Gentile and a woman?" So first of all, she was Gentile, not Jewish. Second of all, she was a woman, which would have said that she didn't have standing socially to come and approach a Jewish rabbi and ask her anything. Third, she had an obstacle of Satan. Why would I say that? Because her daughter was demon-possessed. Makes this a real obvious spiritual warfare. And interestingly enough, Mark doesn't record this. This is one of the tidbits of information for which we need to turn to Matthew, which we will in a few moments. She also had another group of people running interference against her. It was the disciples. Because as she came to seek Jesus' help. In Matthew chapter 15, verse 33, the disciples suggested that Jesus send her away. Interesting. For a time, it looked as though even Jesus was going to send her away. If you're not familiar with the story, she asks and she gets turned down several times. She's told no several times, but she's persistent and continues to ask. She was persistent, and by her persistence, she prevailed. So beginning in Mark chapter 7, verse 24, from there, probably in the Galilee and Gennesaret area, he arose and went to the region of Tyre and Sidon, which I've already talked about where that is. And he, that is Jesus, entered a house and wanted no one to know it. Now, why is that? He was looking for some R&R. But he could not be hidden. You know, even Jesus said, you don't put a light under a bushel basket. Well, Jesus is the light of the world. And even when he wanted, as a man in his humanity, wanted some rest, people found him because he was so needed by people. Tyre and Sidon, as I said, were ancient Phoenician coastal cities, a very Gentile place. Don't miss that, a very Gentile place. Why did Jesus want to remain incognito? He was probably seeking anonymity, away from the crowds for the sake of rest. We forget that even though he is God, he is also what? A man. And as we get hungry and tired, he got hungry and tired. He never sinned, but he experienced all of the natural things, being very God of very God and very man of very man, completely God and completely man. Verse 25, for a woman whose young daughter, that word young there tells us that she wasn't a grown woman, but we don't know her age. For a woman whose young daughter had an unclean spirit, in other words, she was demon-possessed, she heard about him and she came and fell at his feet. So this woman whose daughter was demon-possessed comes to Jesus. As I said, we're not told exactly how old she was, but presumably youngish, whatever that means. You know, so there's people today who are youngish in their 60s, you know, you got to love them. But she probably was a young woman still living with her mother. But we do know one thing about this girl, just one thing. She was demon-possessed. She had a problem, a spiritual problem. The mother had heard of Jesus because even though she was living in Tyre and in Sidon, which is two sort of twin cities, up in the Gentile land of what is today Syria, but then Syrophoenician area, she'd heard, news traveled, and somehow or other, word got out that Jesus was in town. We're not told how, but she heard that he was there. She'd heard of this miracle worker named Jesus. You can imagine, especially if you're a parent, but even if you're not, you can imagine that this mother did everything she knew to do to help her daughter. And guess what? She had no authority, no power to get her daughter free from this demon possession. So she was motivated to seek him out. She came to Jesus, and it says here in Mark that she fell at his feet. And we might ask the question, which we've asked in previous studies, when people bowed down or fell at his feet, was this worship or was this merely bowing to beg for help? We're not told, but my sense is at this point it was probably the latter. It was just her, a Gentile woman, bowing down in obeisance to say, help me, to say, help me. At least at this point, it probably wasn't worship. Why do I say that? Because later on in the story, it says she worships God later in the story. Verse 26, the woman was Greek, a Syrophoenician by birth. I'll just stop there for just a moment. She was Greek, and then in your New Testament, it doesn't mean that you were from Greece. Greek was synonymous with Gentile to the Jewish mind. So she was Gentile, she was Syro, meaning Syrian, and Phoenician, Matthew adds that she was a Canaanite, which means she was a pagan or a heathen, definitely not Jewish, which made her faith all the more remarkable. So this Syrophoenician woman, oh, by the way, another tradition, and this is just tradition, you could take it or leave it. Some other writers from ancient times, when I mean ancient, I mean after Christ, but ancient compared to us, theorized that maybe she was a Jewish woman who was married to a Gentile man. But Syrophoenician by birth, that would kind of suggest to me that she probably was a foreigner and not Jewish. She persistently, notice how it says there in verse 28, she kept asking. It means it's more than she came and said, hey, would you do this for me? And that was the end of it. No, she persisted and continued. It's very important to see this. She asked, and as we're going to see, especially because Mark says she kept asking, but Matthew records some events of her asking, some layers of her beseeching Christ for help on behalf of her daughter. So she persistently asked Jesus to cast the demon out, and the demon was probably not with her. It appears that the demon-possessed girl was at home and was not there with her mother. Now, I want to invite you to, if you want to, you can just listen, but I'm going to start reading from Matthew because Matthew fills in some blanks. Matthew's account, it's Matthew chapter 15, beginning in verse 22 that I'm going to start reading. There's more details about this continual asking. And I think that it's significant. Not that Mark made a mistake in not doing it, but we have more than one gospel, and sometimes they fill in the blanks for each other. The woman's continual pleading with Jesus. So I'm going to start reading in Matthew 15, verse 22. And behold, a woman of Canaan came from that region and cried out to him, saying, notice what she says, have mercy on me, which I think is interesting. She's asking that he cast the demon out of her daughter, but she says, have mercy on me. Talk about that in a moment. Have mercy on me. And she calls Jesus, O Lord. It's not Lord, the name Jehovah, but Lord meaning master. Son of David, which to a Jewish mind would suggest that he may be the Messiah. Now, what she knows about that, we'll talk about in just a minute. But she addresses him as Lord, Son of David, and then she says, my daughter is severely demon-possessed. Now, in Matthew's account here, this woman addresses Jesus as Lord, Son of David. And I just asked myself this question, what did she know about Jesus as Lord? I mean, what did she know about that? What did she know about Jesus being the Son of David? I like to ask questions that there's answers for, but there's no answer to those questions because the text doesn't tell us. But we do know one thing about what she said by calling him Lord, how she knew he was Lord, how she knew that he was the Son of David, which could be a messianic title. We don't know, but here's what we do know. She was right. So somehow or other, she had inside information about who Jesus was. Now she says, my daughter is severely demon-possessed. Now, I think we would all agree that any demon possession is serious. You know, sometimes when we're a little bit sick, we say, oh, it's not that bad. I just got a little cough or something like that, and we play it down. No matter, see? Thank you for the filling in the blanks. That's perfect timing. We tend to play down our sicknesses sometimes. Unless there's a chance that we're going to get some really good sympathy, then we play it up. Especially we men who get man colds. But beyond that, when you talk about demon possession, no one would ever say, well, I'm just possessed a little bit. You know, if you're possessed by a demon, it's serious. But she wasn't just possessed by a demon. She specifically says severely demon possessed. So in some ways, her condition was even more serious than just being demon-possessed. And I also like to point out this, so serious was this daughter's condition. Listen to what I'm saying. So serious was the daughter's condition, and so desperate was the mother's love, that when she begged for mercy, she was not merely begging for her daughter, she was begging for herself. She says, have mercy on me because my daughter is demon possessed. And I think that, whether we've experienced serious tragedy or even just sickness of a child, you know how it is. If you've been through that, you look at that and you say, if I would gladly take this. There was this period of time in my oldest daughter's teenage years when she really struggled with asthma. She doesn't so much anymore, but she really struggled with asthma. And I can remember taking her to the emergency room in the middle of the night, and she couldn't breathe, and being there, and they were doing those nebulizer treatments so many times. They said, we can't give her any more because it's not good for the heart. But she still couldn't breathe. And I can remember being so desperate. It wasn't like, oh, this is an inconvenience because I'm here at the hospital in the middle of the night. No, my daughter can't breathe. And I'm praying and I'm thinking, this woman, even though she wasn't necessarily a godly woman, much less Jewish, or much less, as we would say, a Christian, when she saw her daughter struggling, she was asking for Jesus to do something for her daughter, but it was also for her. Also for her. Verse 23, still in Matthew, and Mark doesn't record this, but he, Jesus, answered her not a word. What's up with that? That seems like, Jesus isn't got the fruit of the Spirit going on in him. He doesn't answer a word. So at first, Jesus doesn't even respond. And again, by the way, just a tip, one of the most important words in studying the Bible is why. Why this? Why that? Just ask why. And sometimes we don't know, but sometimes it's revealed, and sometimes sanctified speculation can help us a little bit. We are not told why Jesus didn't answer, but I think that by the time we get to the end of this passage this evening, we'll try to answer that question at the end. So Jesus didn't answer, but in verse 23, again in Matthew 15, but not in Mark, the disciples chimed in. It says here in 23, and the disciples came in urging him, saying, send her away, for she cries out after us. Well, a lot could be said about this. I don't like to pick on the disciples because by picking on the disciples, I'm picking on me, because everything that they did wrong, I do wrong more. But first of all, they weren't following you guys. It's like the roadies thinking they're the star of the show. They keep begging us for help. No, they're begging Jesus. She's begging Jesus for help. You just happen to be there. But it is interesting that, why did they say send her away? Well, they may have been trying to protect Jesus because they knew that their teacher was weary and that he wanted rest. But it also may have been that they were demonstrating their Jewish disdain for Gentiles. Send this woman away. What do we have to do with her? Maybe a little of both. Maybe neither. We don't know. The text doesn't say. But verse 24, Jesus picks up, and now he does answer. He didn't answer at first. The disciples say, send her away. Now Jesus answers, and he says, I was not sent except to the lost sheep of the house of Israel. Now we got to understand where this fits on the timeline, because in the Old Testament, God told Israel over and over again that they were to be a light to the Gentile nations. They were to let the light of God's law shine, so that, this is in Deuteronomy 7, so that the Gentile nations would say, wow, what kind of a God do these people have, that they have such a perfect and beautiful law that their God gave them. Throughout the Old Testament, it's God's plan, promises to reach the peoples, the Gentiles, the nations. He was to do that through the special people that he had chosen for this task, which was Israel. Now, fast forward to Jesus is here. Jesus is here, but before he goes to the cross and before he gives the Great Commission to the disciples and us that says specifically, preach the gospel to every nation, or as it is isn't it in Mark's, Chris, where it says, preach the gospel to every creature, which means, if you're having a slow evangelism day, witness to some bugs. I mean, sharpen your evangelistic skills by witnessing to a lizard or something. I don't know. But so he says, I was sent only to the sheep of the lost house of Israel. John chapter 1, verse 11, a verse that I'm sure some of you are familiar with. Many of you are probably familiar, even if you don't know the address. He came to his own. Speaking of Jesus, he came to his own. Who's that a reference to? To Israel, to the Jews. Sadly, right there in the beginning of the Gospel of Matthew, but his own received him not. That's a sad story. The King of the Jews came to the Jews and they didn't receive, by and large, it was most of the first Christians were all Jewish, but most Jewish people did not become Christians. See the difference? So, but then he says, but then John in the preface to the book of John, he says, but to as many as received him, to them he gave the power to become the children of God, even to those who believe in his name, who were born not of blood, meaning it's not an ethnic thing. It's not for Jewish or for Italian or for Scottish or for American Heinz 57 or anything like that. It's for everybody. And we know that because at the end of the book, heaven is populated with people from every tribe, tongue, and nation. Hallelujah. It includes every one of us. But where Jesus is on the timeline, he's still coming primarily to the Jews. To the Jews. And it's after Israel rejects him, at least the religious leaders reject him, and then the Great Commission comes that it's like, no, this is for everybody. So we understand he wasn't being instead of anti-Semitic, I'll say he wasn't being anti-Gentile. He was just saying, I'm here to minister to the Jews right now. Ultimately, he would make it clear that he is the Lord of believing Jews and Gentiles, but not yet. Verse 25, at hearing him say, I was not sent except to the lost sheep of the house of Israel. Now she asks again. We see the persistence of this mother. And let this remind us. I was talking to someone recently who was sharing about some friends, mutual friends of ours, that they're Christians and they've raised their children in the best they knew how. None of us do it perfectly, but their adult children who were raised in the church have nothing to do with God. And these parents are beating themselves up saying, it must be my fault. No, you can't save your kids. No parent does everything perfectly. Every single one of us have made enough mistakes that if it was up to us, none of our kids would be saved. Our kids are saved because of the grace of God. That doesn't mean that we don't try. But here's what I told this person. Well, tell your friend, don't give up, or don't make the mistake of thinking, well, they were Christians as young people, so maybe they're still... Listen, the fact that you have unsaved family and friends, don't try to pretend they're Christian. Face the facts so that you can pray for them. Pray for their salvation and never give up praying for the salvation of your children. So at this point, she comes because she's persistent. She's not going to give up. Her daughter isn't any better because Jesus didn't answer. Her daughter isn't any better because the disciples said, send her away. So she comes and asks again. And I say, good for her. Good for her. Never stop praying for God's will, even if you don't get it immediately. But I'm giving the end away and we're not there yet. Then she came and worshiped him, saying, Lord, help me. I love a prayer like that. A prayer like that, I think, is a prayer that moves heaven and earth. Rather than saying, God, sit down, take the load off, and let me explain what I need for you to do. Now, again, we wouldn't say that, but sometimes we pray as though we're going to prescribe what God should do in this situation. She just says, help me. Don't be bashful when you don't know how to pray and you just want to say, help me, because that's a good prayer. Help me. Now this time, it appears that she was actually worshiping him, because it says, worshiping him. She worshiped him and said this. And I think that this is a revelation that being Gentile did not prohibit her from worshiping Jesus or from petitioning his heavenly help. Petitioning his heavenly help. You know, we sometimes get real technical speaking about, well, God doesn't hear the prayers of unbelievers. No, but I'd rather an unbeliever call out to God for help, even if it isn't God's will to help that person, than not. Because calling out to God is a great start. We could say technically he only hears the prayers of the redeemed or the prayers of the lost as they ask for salvation. But I think that this says something. But Jesus is still not ready to help, because in verse 26, he answered and said, it is not good to take the children's bread and throw it to the little dogs. Now in verse 24, he says, I'm here for the lost sheep of Israel. And he doesn't say, and not for the Gentiles. But now he's going to give kind of a parabolic look at his no answer and say, well, I'm here for the children of Israel and not to throw it to the dogs. It is not good to take the children's bread and throw it to dogs. You don't need to turn back to Mark just yet, but I'll read what Mark 7:27 says. It's similar, but just a little side flavor. But Jesus said to her, let the children be filled first. The fact that Mark says, let the children of Israel be filled first means it's not no, never. It's no, not right now. If you don't mind, I'll tell a funny story about a person. I don't think they would mind. It's a public story, but a person that some of you are aware of, at least by name. Jason Deutsch was madly in love with an Indian girl that he met at Bible college. And he went to India to work in a seminary and to do ministry there. And he really hoped that he would meet this girl's father to ask for her hand in marriage. And he told me that, he says, he gave a 2-word answer. No, never. So he persisted. He persisted, and he's been married many, many years now to that young girl. And because he's the first one that I ever heard saying, winning the girl's easy, it's winning the girl's dad that's tough. But here is a similar thing. She's not going to be, by saying the children will be filled first, according to Mark, there's hope. But he says, or because it's not good to take the children's bread and throw it to the little dogs. Now this is important, what Jesus is referring to. Now I'm sure that some of you, if not all of you, are aware that in that day, Jewish people referred to Gentiles as dogs. People didn't, by and large, have pet dogs in their homes. Dogs were scavengers, dogs were vicious, dogs were something you threw rocks at to say, get away from us, because they're threatening and dirty and everything else. And that's what the Jews meant when they called Gentiles dogs. By the way, I don't know if Gentiles were dogs, what did they call Samaritans? Because they hated them even worse than Gentiles, because they were half-breeds in their eyes. But what Jesus says in Mark, the word that he uses here is not the term dog. The children refers to the children of Israel. He doesn't refer to them as dogs, meaning those scavenger, bad, to be avoided dogs, but Jesus calls them the little dogs, which is saying they're puppies. And you know what? I mean, even if you don't like dogs, puppies are cute, you know? I mean, let's face it. Even cats are cute when they're kittens. But then that comes to an abrupt end for some of us. Just kidding. Those of you who have cats, God bless you. Keep them all. But Jesus was not calling the woman a scavenger dog to throw rocks at. He was using a kind word that would be representative of a puppy that might be cute. But he's still not ready to cast the demon out, because even though he's telling her no, the bread's for the children of Israel, and not for the puppies, okay? And I think it's interesting. It is my favorite New Testament commentary by Hendrickson and Kistemaker. Hendrickson writes, after all, dogs, no matter how dear to the owner, they are not children, and they have no right to be treated like children. So here. But the woman was still not to be denied. See, now, isn't it interesting? Mark says one word. He says, she continually asked him. She kept asking him. But Matthew fleshes this out and shows this continual pleading. She will not be denied. First, he doesn't answer at all. Then he says no. And then he says, well, not now, because you're just a puppy and you're not one of the kids, or whatever, however you want to do that. But she persists, and still in Matthew, verse 27, she said, yes, Lord. She agrees with him, because you don't want to do what Peter says and say, no, Lord. Peter's worst foot and mouth episode recorded in the scriptures was saying, not so, Lord, contradicting Jesus. By the way, I'm saying that because I do not recommend contradicting Jesus. But she said, yes, Lord, yet, but, even the little dogs, even the puppies underneath the table, eat the crumbs which fall from the master's table. And at this point, you'll forgive me for maybe reading into the scriptures, but I think Jesus just got a smile on his face and says, good for you. You're not going to be denied on this thing. She acknowledged that she was not worthy because she was a Gentile, and even though a cute puppy, she was still a dog in the eyes of the Jews. But she was willing to have, listen to this, give me the scraps from the table, it'll be enough. Give me what the Jewish people don't want, and I'll be happy to take whatever. Oh, that we have that attitude when we're praying to God for things, to say, Lord, here's what I want, but I'll take whatever comes from your hand, because whatever comes from your hand is just right. Now Jesus is at last ready to grant the woman's request. So in Matthew chapter 15, verse 28, Jesus then, and I think the then is important in this verse, because it says then, meaning after hearing what she said, then fine, don't give me what belongs to the children, but give something to the dog under the table. She's, desperate woman for her daughter. Then Jesus answered and said to her, O woman, and I love this, great is your faith. Let it be to you as you desire. There's only 2 times in the Gospels that Jesus mentions faith with the adjective great in front of it. There's only 2 times that he commends someone for having great faith. He says, your faith has made you well, or your faith is this, your faith is that. Only 2 times he talks about great faith. Obviously, one of them is here, and the other is the Roman centurion in Matthew chapter 8. Both were Gentiles. And I think it might be significant that Jesus looks at Gentiles who are far from the faith, and they express faith, and he sees, that's great faith, especially compared to the wobbly, weak faith of the Jews, who some believed, praise God, but most did not. Now, if you want to flip back to Mark, we'll say we're done with Matthew for now. Mark 20, verse 7, verse 20, chapter 7, verse 29. Then he said to her, for this saying, go your way, the demon has gone out of your daughter. And when she had come to the house, that's why I said earlier, the girl was still at home, but the mother was out chasing Jesus for help. And when she had come to her house, what did she find? The demon was gone, and her daughter was lying or resting in the bed. Okay, that's the story. What's an application that every one of us, if not now, someday, this will be helpful? Okay? Why did Jesus delay answering the woman's request and then do it? If you intended to do it, because, look at it. She didn't change his mind. You can't change God's mind. I mean, what kind of a God would he be if we could change his mind? That would be scary. But I would suggest to you that this is not a unique thing. I want to give you 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and there's many more that we could cite. Abraham and Sarah, how many prayers did they offer? How many years did they wait for the son of promise before? I mean, even God allowed them to go down that horrible rabbit trail with Hagar and with the Ishmael, which we're still having problems ever since because of that. But eventually, they were given Isaac. Abraham, in another story, was ordered to make Isaac a burnt offering. Now, this wasn't years, but think about, it was no doubt a long night when he was told, rise up early in the morning tomorrow and take your son, your only son who you love, and offer him as a sacrifice. We don't have any record of what Abraham prayed, but I kind of bet he was praying. I wouldn't be surprised if some of his prayers was, is that you, Lord? You really want me to do this? Please reveal if it's not before I do it. It was a long night, and then they had to journey all the way from one location to Mount Moriah where he offered. He got to the place where his son Isaac was bound on the altar, and he had the knife in his hand ready to thrust it into his child's chest and offer him as a sacrifice before God stayed his hand. Sometimes God doesn't answer our prayers right away. In Psalm 22, verse 2, David expresses dismay when God did not immediately answer his prayers. How about in the New Testament? On his way to heal Jairus' daughter, Jesus was delayed by the woman with the hemorrhage long enough that Jairus' daughter, what? Died. How disappointed do you suppose Jairus was when he got news, don't trouble the teacher any longer, your daughter is dead. But what did Jesus do? He went anyway and he raised her from the dead. One more example, Jesus delayed his departure to heal Lazarus, resulting in his death before arriving, not only to raise Lazarus from the dead, but to speak the words to Lazarus' two sisters, some of the most beautiful words that Jesus spoke in the Gospels, I am the resurrection and the life. Whoever believes in me, though he die, yet he shall live. And whoever lives and believes in me will never die. Well, the same thing happened to this Gentile woman. She prayed and she prayed and she prayed and she was desperate that Jesus touch her possessed daughter and fix her. In every case, faith was tested and then rewarded. And he does that to us. Don't despair when the heavens are silent to your prayers. Don't despair. It's not that God isn't listening. It's not that God doesn't care. It's certainly not that God is unable. But we need to trust him. My last line on my notes is, let us trust not only in the Lord's ability and in his love, but let us learn to trust him in his timing as well. Father in heaven, thank you for this kind of interesting story, kind of troubling story too, at first glance, to read of Jesus ignoring someone and then telling them no, and the disciples saying, go away, and then grace abounding and the girl being cleansed. Father, may we strap these things on as more than just Bible stories, but snapshots of you and your kindness, your sovereignty, not only over what you do, but when you do it. May we trust you more and see you do sometimes bigger things than what we expected. And we praise you for it in Jesus' name. Amen.